Alright, today in class we talked about angles and parallel lines. So we're going to classify those angles that are formed by parallel lines in a transversal, and then we'll find measures of angles that are formed by two parallel lines in a transversal. So adjacent angles, by definition, they are angles that are next to each other. We can be really specific and say that they share a vertex and a side of the angle. So 1 and 2 are considered adjacent because they are next to each other. We could also say 1 and 3 are adjacent. And if I threw a 4 in here, I could say 3 and 4 are adjacent, as well as 2 and 4 are adjacent. A linear pair is when two adjacent, next to, angles form a line. So angle 1 and 2, they form a line, and we know that by when we say a line, that we know that that measures 180 degrees. So we could say angle 1 and angle 2 add to be 180 degrees. If I threw a 3 in here, we could say angle 2 and angle 3 add to be 180 degrees. Vertical angles, these are angles that are formed by two intersecting lines, and they are non-adjacent, so they are not next to each other. I like to tell my students that these are the kinds of angles that form an X. And we can see that if angle 1 were 150, then angle 2 would also be 150. So we can even say that vertical angles are congruent. They're exactly the same. Complementary angles, these are two angles that add to be 90. So if we took that 63 plus the 27, this equals 90. These two angles do not have to be adjacent. To be supplementary, it's two angles that add to be 180, so that 153 plus the 27 will give us 180 degrees. And again, these do not have to be adjacent, but a linear pair does have to be adjacent. So that's what makes supplementary angles and linear pairs different. Parallel lines are lines that are in the same plane and never intersect, and skew lines are lines that never intersect and not in the same plane. So I went over this with an example. I'm going to use the next page to talk about skew. We'll come back to that transversal in just a second. But I drew part of a cube. And I labeled this A, B, C, D, E, F. We talked about how E, F, and CD were parallel, and also EF and AB were parallel because we could draw a plane through EF and AB, and they would be in the same plane. But then I said, what about if we talk about AB, the side AB? AB and CE are not in the same plane, and they do not intersect, so AB would be skew to CE. They are not in the same plane and they do not intersect. Hopefully that will help. Okay, on to transversals. Transversals are, or a transversal is a line that intersects two or more lines. So here we have, if we call it A, B, and C. C is the transversal because it intersects A right there and it intersects B right there. So C is what's known as our transversal. We do know that A and B will eventually intersect, but now as we see it on our picture, C does show the intersecting of both those lines. Interior angles are angles that lie on the inside of the line. So these are our lines. We're talking about the angles that lie between the lines. So 3 and 4 are inside, and 5 and 6 are inside. Exterior are angles that lie on the outside of our lines. So we have 1 and 2 are outside, and 7 and 8 that are outside our lines. Those are known as exterior angles. When two parallel lines are cut by a transversal, we get special pairs that occur. The first special pair is known as alternate interior angles, and I will abbreviate it AIA. These are interior, so they're inside our parallel lines, and they lie on opposite sides of the transversal. I like to say alternate sides of the transversal. So we have 3 and 5. These angles are congruent, so if 3 were 45 degrees, 5 would also be 45 degrees. And then we also have another pair, 4 and 6, that would also be congruent. Alternate exterior are when the angles lie on the outside of those parallel lines and on opposite sides of the transversal, or alternate sides of the transversal. So our first pair are 1 and 8. It also tells us that these are congruent, so if 1 were 120 degrees, 8 would also be 120 degrees. The other pair that we have here are 2 and 7. Corresponding angles are angles that are in the same position, so I like to think same side of the transversal in the same position, and I tell kids that these make an F shape. These angles are also congruent. So our first one, sorry about that. Anyway, so they're the angles that form an F. So we can see here that 2 and 5, they're in the same position on the same side of the transversal, and you might be able to see it easier with a different pair. We have 1 and 6. We also have 8 and 4, and if you see, that's where that F comes into play. If you want to flip it over or upside down, you can still see that F. And then 3 and 7. All of these angles are congruent to each other, so 2 would be congruent to 5, while 1 is congruent to 6, and then we can make other associations later. Consecutive interior CIAs, these are angles that are inside, that's that interior, and on the same side, so that they're on the same side of the transversal and inside our parallel lines. So that we have 5 and 4, and it says here that these are supplementary. They are not a linear pair because they are not adjacent. 5 would have to be right here for those two to be adjacent and a linear pair, but they are supplementary. We also have 6 and 3 that are supplementary as well, and they are consecutive interior angles. So on example 1, we're going to find all the different pairs of congruent angles. So our AIAs, we're looking for the alternate interior. So interior would be like 3 and 5. So we would say 3 and 5 are congruent. Let's say angle 3. And then our other pair of interior angles that are congruent would be 4 and 6. Okay, our next one says consecutive interior. Okay, so we're still inside our parallel lines, but they're on the same side, so we're going to say 3 and 6. These are not congruent, so I'm not going to write a congruent statement. I'm going to say that angle 3 and angle 6 equal 180 degrees. We also have the other side of the transversal, angle 4 and angle 5 here. So I'm going to write angle 4 plus angle 5 is 180 degrees. Next we have alternating exterior angles. So these are the angles that are outside because they're exterior. So 2 and 7, these are congruent as long as our lines are parallel. So 2 and 7, and the other pair would be the 1 and 8. Okay, CA are corresponding angles, so they are on the same side of the transversal, and these are the ones that make the F. So 2 here would be congruent to 5. We also have 4 and 8. We have 1 and 6. And then one more, angles 3 and angle 7. Okay, the angles that form a linear pair, we have quite a few of these. So I'm not going to label them all, but we'll talk about them all. If we take these two, 2 and 4, they are adjacent. We can't say that they are congruent, but we can say that they add to be 180. We also have 1 and 3. I'm going to go down to the bottom. There's actually 2 more pairs there. We could say 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 add to be 180. If I look at the bottom ones though, let's talk about those. I would say angle 6 and angle 5 add to be 180. And then I also have angle 7 and angle 8 that equal 180. And again, there are 2 more pairs. We could say 6 and 7 add to be 180 and 5 and 8 add to be 180. The last pair on here are your vertical angles. So remember, our vertical angles make an X. So angle 1 would be congruent to angle 4. Angle 2 would be congruent to angle 3. And then at the bottom, we have angle 6 is oh, you can't see that, sorry. Angle 6 is congruent to angle 8, and then our last one, angle 5, is congruent to angle 7. Alright, example 2 is actually going to ask you to find all the angles. So it tells us that 4 is 72 degrees. Now there's a couple things we can look at. We know that 1 and 4 are vertical angles. So because they're vertical angles, this will be 72. We can see that 4 and 6 are alternate interiors, so 6 is 72 degrees. 4 and 8 are corresponding angles, so 8 is 72 degrees as well. So now let's talk about the other ones on there. I know that 4 and 2 are a linear pair. That means they have to add to be 180 degrees. So if I take 180 degrees and subtract 72, I get 108. So my angle 2 is 108. I know that 2 and 3 are vertical angles, so 3 is 108. I know that 2 and 7 are alternate exterior, so 7 is 108. And I know that 2 and 5 are corresponding, so 5 is also 108 degrees. On example 3 it says, the parallel lines are cut by a transversal, find x. Here we have corresponding angles, and we know that corresponding angles are congruent, so that means their measures are equal. So we're going to set them equal and solve. So to solve this, we divide by 2, and x will give us 59 degrees. Your problems on your assignment will be a little bit more complicated than this, but it'll be the same idea where you'll either set them equal or add them to equal to 180, depending on where they are on your shape. Alright, good luck with your assignment 9-1, transversals and angle pairs.